hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And we move on now to Burkina Faso. We mentioned that the country has just announced that it will scrap fees for all African travelers. The government says this bold step is meant to boost regional integration, tourism and cultural exchange. It comes as Captain Ibrahima Kane, who seized power in 2022, continues to champion Pan-African unity, even as his country faces serious security challenges and redeeming its relationship with ECOWAS. But what does this really mean for trade, economic development and the balance of power, we ask? To answer this question, we're joined now by Ibrahima Kane, Senior Policy Advisor at Open Society Foundation, to help unpack the wider implications. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Kane.
Thank you for having me today in your program.
Obviously, this is a progressive step and one that has been called for all African countries, in fact, to take that bold step. So Burkina Faso has done it, and it says it's about African unity and boosting tourism. Will it amount to that?
Yes, I think it's a trend. When you look at the index that is published every December by the African Development Bank called the Visa Index in Africa, you will see a trend that is developing at the moment in Africa about opening the door of the continent to African citizens. The latest before Burkina Faso was Kenya, who even stopped using e-visa for any African. I think it's a trend, and it's a trend that will support, the program that you mentioned earlier of the AU about free trade on the continent. It will really boost mobility on the continent and will help, in my view, Africans to trade among themselves better. And maybe it will also boost the way the continent is seeing itself, because when people have this possibility of working, trading together, they will know each other and they will develop that idea of an African unity. I think it's a very, very good initiative.
So which sectors of trade and investment do you see as most gaining from this visa-free access?
I think it's, the most important trade in Africa is the trade at the borders. Because what people move from one border to another one, it's extremely important, and it helps many people, particularly women who are doing that trade, to really develop their business and to exchange the goods that they have in the continent. Now, by stopping the visa issues, the visa hurdles and other, maybe it will help now the big businessmen who have no time to go and stop trying to get visas and other, to really also consider developing that kind of movement within the continent. Now, this initiative, I think people need to also look at it in the context of the creation of IS. Because I heard about what the government said yesterday at the end of the cabinet meeting, but I want to see the document to see to what extent really the government is opening Burkina Faso to the rest of the world. Because one of the first decisions that IOS countries have decided is to also have their own rules about free movement with the rest of the continent. They decided to continue the relationship with ECOWAS, but they stopped, for example, the kind of relationship that they had with North Africa and other region of the world. You know, Niger, for instance, is also close to Chad. So now it will be important to see to what extent that decision of the government is in compliance with the treaty that the three countries have adopted recently to organize the free movement in the new region, which is the IOS country.
So let's talk about this visa policy alternative model, just in terms of integration, but also outside of the traditional economic regional blocks. Wouldn't this also require a revisiting of red tape when it comes to ports of entry, law enforcement, etc.? Does it look at that? Is it inclusive of it?
Well, one of the features of the AU is having norms that really help free movement on the continent. The AU, when it was adopting the free trade treaty, also adopted at the same time a free movement treaty. The free trade treaty has almost 50 ratification. The other one has not even reached six ratification. The free movement treaty has not reached 6 ratification. That also tells you about the difficulty that we have in Africa to understand the way our African leaders think. If you want trade to develop, you need to open your borders. You need to make sure that people come freely and go out freely. But you cannot just say goods can move and people cannot move. I think there is a need here to really look at the way some countries, particularly Southern African countries, the way they also look at the free movement of good, because of good and people. Because when you want people to do trade with you, you should also allow the person to come in your country to do trade and to go back to their country. It's easy to do in West Africa. It's easy to some extent to do in East Africa, but within West Africa and East Africa, it's only now that we have started, developing this mobility issue, except between Tanzania and the rest of West African countries. And we need to look at some of these issues. And Southern Africa is the most complicated one with other regions of the continent, I have to confess.
Another issue that could complicate things, we spoke about it, the security situation, given the fact that, the Sahel remains virtually unstable, with 40% of Burkina Faso under militant control. So how would this impact? Obviously, it's a desire to have more people travel to Burkina Faso and the other interconnected countries. But would people not fear their safety if for tourism, for instance? But in terms of opening up trade, there would also be different considerations, but pretty much the same concerns.
Definitely, yes. There will be a lot of problem for the free movement of people. But you say for tourism. But for the rest, it's quite very interesting to look at what is happening in the Sahel. I always attend the trade fair in Dakar in December. And I have the chance to, when I go there, to go and try to talk to people coming from Ghana, coming from Nigeria, coming from Togo, and coming from Burkina Faso. Despite the big crisis in the Sahel region, they always find their way by road from Accra, Kumasi to Dakar, from Ouagadougou, from even Niamey, which means that you have to go through Burkina Faso and Mali to come to Senegal. I think they have their own system on paying bribe to all these rebels group to get there. I think the volume has not really changed because of the war. What really has changed is the way that they are using. Now it's much longer to go from Niamey to Dakar, but people continue to travel on our continent. But I do believe that this crisis will end very soon, that we have an opportunity here when our countries, one by one, are opening their doors and their windows, that we start really thinking, how do we trade among ourselves? How do we develop our own economy in our continent? You know, I think what is happening outside of the continent is telling us about the necessity for us to really think Africa as a whole, not different these small countries that are not really, that cannot survive economically. But if we trade among ourselves, if we develop our economy, we will get there. And I think this kind of step taken by a country, even in war, is giving us the lesson that we need to do more about intra-trade in Africa.
Thank you so much for joining us. Ibrahima Kane is a Senior Policy Advisor at Open Society Foundation, just speaking to us about Burkina Faso's announcement that it will be issuing visa-free travel for African citizens.